Hi, everyone. Today we have another community conversation. We're joined by Gretchen Hunt, the executive administrator with the Office of, um, the Louisville Metro Government's Office for Women. It was an entity created in 1991 to raise the status of women in our community through education, advocacy, and legislation. Gretchen came on about 2 months ago, and it's recently been moved back to the mayor's office with the Office of Equity. So I'm going to let you take the reins from there. Thank you, Gretchen.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you to the Louisville Bar Association for allowing us to talk about gender equity and women's issues. It's really a great opportunity, and I just want to say hello to all my fellow lawyers out there and folks in the community, especially the moms who are still struggling with issues of childcare and daycare and gaps in the system and navigating that part of the pandemic. So I don't know if folks are tuning in virtually, but if you are and you're at home and you're still navigating those things, I see you and I hear you, and just am in solidarity with you and fighting for better policies so we change that world to make it more equitable. I just had to do that pitch because I know a lot of mom lawyers who are out there, and as well as dad lawyers who are navigating these issues. So first of all, Shannon, thanks again for having us. The Office for Women, as you talked about, is an interesting office in the mayor's office under the Office of Equity. So that's a lot of under, but the important part of that is that we are centered in equity. And so we work alongside other great initiatives combating historical racism and other forms of discrimination in this office. And so everything that we do at Office for Women, we try to center, and so looking at it through an intersectional approach. And there are 7 main areas of focus. We look at, as you talked about, we try to raise the status of women through education, advocacy, and legislation. And the focus areas are gender-based violence, human trafficking, social and economic well-being, housing, education, civic engagement, and autonomy. So if you think about that, that's a lot. And I, as an attorney who has a background in working both in immigration law and then representing survivors of violence, 2 things stood out for me really quickly at this office. One is that there is a focus on legislation, which is great because not a lot of, some lawyers, some of us do work in the policy realm, but it's really fun to sometimes dabble in that. We often in the courtroom are representing case by case, and if you're doing impact litigation, you may be changing the law, but otherwise it's fun sometimes to be in the other side of it, of shaping the laws and changing things on a systemic level through legislative advocacy. So that was the first thing that really appealed to me about the office. And then second, that there is a focus on gender equity and gender-based violence. But what I want to highlight and talk about a little bit today is also that in addition to the more traditional things that I'm working on with the office to combat gender-based violence through the criminal and civil legal system, what this office allows us to do is also looking at all of those other factors that contribute to violence. So, areas like social and economic well-being, education, housing, things that if we guarantee for women in particular, are more likely to set them up so that they will not be vulnerable to domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking, or that they will have more protective resources to respond if they find themselves in that situation. So I'm really interested in the work of this office because we could do those traditional things and do some non-traditional work. So I'm happy to talk about a few of our initiatives or break for a minute from talking and see if you have any questions just about the scope of the office.
I would love to hear about your initiatives and kind of the policies that you're focusing on in the office.
Great. Well, I'll start again with so I would say the more traditional approaches and things we're doing and things that lawyers and folks, especially who work in the criminal justice field would recognize. We are trying to look at some of the issues of gender-based violence, particularly how they've been made more severe during the pandemic. We know anecdotally, there's not a lot of great research out there, but anecdotally from law enforcement and prosecutors and victim advocates that cases, for example, of domestic violence, sexual violence, child abuse have gotten worse during the pandemic, both in frequency and severity. And we're seeing that also in a rise in homicides, including intimate partner violence homicides. And the risks to women aren't all the same depending on your identity. So in Kentucky, we have really alarming statistics that indicate that Black women in particular are at 10 times more risk for intimate partner violence homicide than white women, which really raises alarm bells about what are those larger systemic discrimination, racism issues that are making Black women more vulnerable. So we are looking at that in a variety of ways. One of the things we're doing is we're partnering with LMPD and prosecutors and victim advocates to bring in some national experts to train on stalking. We don't see a lot of stalking prosecutions, and sometimes, even though we have a pretty robust statute, there's less understanding of how to effectively prosecute those cases. It's not as if people don't want to and aren't trying to, but it takes some nuance to also learn about how you document that, especially if it's cyber stalking, and then how to convince juries of a crime that sometimes is based on subjective fear. So we're bringing in national trainers, and we'll do a training in June on stalking. And again, stalking is an attempt to build up skills specifically to prevent both stalking and then those intimate partner violence homicides. But back to the point about disproportionality based on race, our office is also looking at how can we get more data on who's being impacted by gender-based violence in our city? How can we dig deeper into that, do focus groups, figure out from the community what are those risk factors, and how can we be combating those larger systemic inequalities? So for example, when I talked about the Black women are at higher risk for intimate partner violence homicide, one major factor may be the history of racism and discrimination, because you see higher rates of unemployment in Black communities. You see disinvestment, you see lack of resources, you see redlining, you see housing gaps. And so those all combine to create situations that are potentially much more unsafe. So it's not as much looking at the individual or the individual couple. There are risk factors we would look at, but we're looking at those bigger picture pieces. So that's one initiative we're doing. We're also doing work in the human trafficking field to hopefully bring that kind of comprehensive training also to prosecutors, law enforcement, and victim advocates. But the upstream stuff is what I think is a little more interesting, and it's something that probably lawyers don't think about a lot because we are not talking about things like land use and access to urban farming and diapers, which are 3 things that have been on my desk the past couple of weeks. So if you bear with me so I can explain a little bit about some initiatives we're doing in that field. You know, I think lawyers, we are traditionally in the situation where we are usually responding to once a conflict has happened. But lawyers, I think, can also be looking forward strategically and setting up systems and looking at structural problems so that we prevent problems from happening in the future. And I'm sure there's corporate folks and people that would talk about risk management and would think of it in that context. But I like to apply that to gender-based violence. So take diapers. So you might think, what in the world do diapers have to do with gender-based violence or homicide? Well, diapers in this city are a big basic need that's not being met for women and men, but women suffer the brunt of this. So 1 in 3 families cannot afford diapers. Lack of diapers results in higher maternal postpartum depression. It results in lack of attachment between mom and baby. It results in moms not being able to go to school or to work because they can't send kids to daycare without diapers. It results in more ER visits because of diaper rash. And so that's the harm of it, right? So how does that connect to gender-based violence? Well, we know, for example, that kids who develop attachment disorders, so if they're unable to bond with mom, so you think of a baby sitting in their soiled diaper for 12 hours all day, who's crying, who mom's doing her best, wants to help that kid and soothe them, but can't. They're learning that their basic needs can't be met. They are not building trust. And we know that attachment disorder can result in a much higher rate of kids acting out with violence. So the kid today who is not diapered may become the youth or the adult later who uses violence because they've not been given the tools and the development early on to be able to manage those emotions and those behaviors. I'm not saying that everybody who doesn't have a diaper commits violence, but there is a through line. So here's the policy part of what we're looking at. Federal policy, food stamps do not cover diapers. So if you are a person who's in poverty, you don't have food stamps to cover them. There's no one-to-one. You can't substitute anything for a diaper. You know, if you're short on food, you can maybe go to a food bank. You can maybe substitute something else. There's no substitute for a diaper. And so there's nothing that can stand in. TANF, which is Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, can cover diapers, but it always runs short. And what we're talking about is about $100 per kid per month. So it's a big cost even for probably middle and upper class lawyers who are moms and dads listening to this. So we're looking at, okay, what would be federal policy that can change? On the state level, there could be changes so that diapers are not taxed. You may have heard about the pink tax. The pink tax is on feminine hygiene products. So some people have wanted to remove that. Same could be true for diapers. But here in Louisville, we're looking at scaling up an existing diaper bank. We have one diaper bank, which distributes diapers to 13 agencies. They give out about 100,000 a year. But the latest research from national folks who do diaper advocacy says that we're meeting 1% of the need in Louisville, 1%. And that in fact, we would need to be giving out 3 million diapers a year. And if that sounds like a lot, Pierce City, Cincinnati, gives out 2 million a year in their diaper bank. So we're looking at scaling. And so I'm looking at how can we in our office help connect and be a convener to get folks together to look at policy solutions, also look at scaling up their operations, getting them 501c3 status. So we've already referred them to legal services, to Legal Aid Society to help with that. We would love lawyers who know anything about warehouse space or land use to partner on that initiative as well, to get them a bigger warehouse space and then writing grants. So that's an example of upstream prevention. Also, I just want to mention, we also have been looking at, zoning. We are really paying attention to the great work being done in Metro Council and by the mayor's office that has looked at the racial history of zoning in the city and how to be more equitable. So we're looking closely at that because for women in particular, we know that housing is a major, not having housing is a major risk factor for things like domestic violence and human trafficking. So we're watching zoning changes. And then one other thing that we're working on that's upstream prevention is crime victim leave. So if you're a Metro employee, you would have 7 days off. And we're working closely with the Metro Council Women's Caucus co-chair, Representative Cassie Chambers Armstrong. I'm sorry, not Representative, Councilmember Cassie Chambers Armstrong and Councilmember Nicole George on that ordinance. And that would again give people those concrete benefits, days off to attend court or relocate or do things. So diapers, land, legislation are some of the ways that we're addressing at least gender-based violence and inequality. And there's many other initiatives we're working on, but I wanted to share some of those in particular.
Well, it sounds like you all have your hands full of a lot right now. I am fascinated by this upstream tactic and just finding the root of these problems that we're seeing. And I'm still floored by that 1% statistic with the diapers. That's a wild number. Well, the LBA would love to help in any way with those diaper drives. We currently have an effort to get our lactation suite in the courthouse. So maybe we can work together to get our goals met. Are there any bills in the State House right now? I know they're nearing the end of their session, but is there any bills that you're watching or have passed that you're excited about or wary about?
So I didn't do all my homework on that one. I will be first to say it because I'm much more focused on local ordinances, although I do pay attention to Frankfurt. It's a little different. For those folks who may know of my past experience, I have worked mostly in Frankfurt for the past 15 or so years with the Attorney General's office and the Kentucky Association of Sexual Assault Programs, and worked a lot on legislation in those offices. I've been watching some of the things that look at maternal health or well-being or access to public benefits. So on the positive side, there have been some extensions where people would get Medicaid benefits in the postpartum period, which are positive because people still need that support then. On the negative side, seeing a lot of decisions made on public benefits that harm the very communities that we're talking about disproportionately, poor folks, communities of color, people who have been in areas that have been, where there's been disinvestment across the state, whether you're talking about Eastern Kentucky or the west end of Louisville. So those are really harmful, and those will result in a lack of safety, so there is that through line to violence and violence prevention. And also, the thing I want to just say is that this is a very urgent time. We have yet to see, I think, the full impact of what the pandemic has done on women's labor, and in particular, women of color, immigrant women, Black women who are sectored in a lot of jobs that they have not had flexibility or have had to drop out of the workforce because of lack of daycare. And so combined, if you see the cut to these benefits along with these harms of the pandemic, I really think that we're going to see a lot of harm come from this, because ultimately when women do not do well, communities do not do well. Investment in women and in gender-based policy has great ROI. So taking the diaper need issue, there was a study out of Connecticut that found that if you give $1 to diaper need, $1, it results in an $11 raise in family income. And there's study after study after study that shows that if you have those basic needs met, if you invest in women, entrepreneurs, small business owners, that's where you have a lot of focused women in employment, you see rises to your general income and in your economy. So I just want to say that that's really, really vital. And so whether that's state policy or local policy, we're really looking at how can there be a gender lens. So I do want to say, because today is an exciting thing, the mayor just announced, there's a press release that just came out, that he has asked our office to convene a small task force of Metro employees to look at creating a report on a commission on gender equity. And so we are going to be holding public meetings, both in person and virtual, to get input from women across this community and men as well, because gender equity impacts everyone, on what should be the focus, the scope, and the structure of that Commission on Gender Equity. Because we really want to know that, and the mayor knows that this is an urgent issue. We know the pandemic has shown us that we have to have these things in place, whether it's paid leave, paid parental leave, whether it's daycare, we have to develop these structural supports and this infrastructure so that we can thrive as a community. So we're really excited about that. And that will be a whole tool to bring lots of good minds together across Louisville to look at more policy solutions and legislative solutions. So that's also an exciting thing to close out Women's History Month today.
Nice. Well, I guess my final question is, how can LBA members and attorneys watching this contribute to your efforts and help, women around the city and girls around the city?
Absolutely. So we would love for our partners in the legal community to reach out to the Office for Women. I would love to meet with anyone, talk to you about how your firm or your nonprofit or your community group or your women's book club or your church group or anybody might be involved in the work of the Office for Women. We definitely are collecting diapers for the St. Bernadette's Diaper Bank. So if you want to do a diaper drive, they've been hard hit by the pandemic and didn't get a lot of their diaper drives from schools. So that's a great project. And then, we have this crime victim ordinance right now. And we would love it if you contact your Metro Council members and urge them to pass this crime victim ordinance bill that would grant paid leave to Metro employees who are victims of crime. It's not just gender-based violence, it's gun violence, it's anyone. So that would be a second ask. So diapers, call your Metro Council member about the ordinance, and then partner with us. The sky's the limit of what we can do. So if you are a land and zoning attorney, I want to talk to you. If you are, if you do corporate law or you do nonprofit law or you are in family law, there is a way that we can partner together to elevate the status of women. So I just really appreciate the invite today, Shannon, and look forward to more collaborations.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you coming here. It's been such a great discussion. I will repost this video and include your contact information and a link if there's one to the diaper drive. And you attorneys watching, regardless of your field, you can do something to help the Office for Women. So happy Women's History Month, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Bye.